On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome along, and tonight's Mark Steyn Show. I'm taking a night off from the charms of the female penis. You can have too much of a good thing, so like Keir Starmer, you have to know when to walk away, even from a be-penised woman. And right now, Sir Keir prefers tucking into Johnsonian cake rather than women with penises. We'll get an alternate take on gateau-gate from the one and only Peter Hitchens. Chinese troops on Her Majesty's sovereign soil. You like the sound of that? It's actually more important to the future of the monarchy than whether a couple of California dingbats swing by Windsor Castle. Alexandra Marshall will mull that one for us. And demography, you know what they say, demography is destiny. And even if it isn't, you better have rapid course correction, because as I said many years ago, the future belongs to those who show up for it. And the English, the Welsh, Irish, North and South, and particularly the Scots aren't showing up for it at all. The SNP want an independent Scotland, but apparently aren't bothered that there won't be any Scots in it. I can't see the point of that personally. Paul Morland has a fantastic new book out called Tomorrow's People. You might want to skim through the pages to see if you're in there or whether you're one of yesterday's people. And don't forget, we love your input, whether watching on telly, listening on wireless, or following my simultaneous interpretative dance version of the show on TikTok. That's a big hit. You should try and catch it. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can Twitter me at gbnews, or you can leave a crop circle in your back garden and we'll send a drone over. But first, as ever, here's the news with Miranda Shunker.
Thank you. Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Russia's deadline for Ukrainian troops to surrender in Mariupol has passed, with the commander in the besieged city warning his forces could survive just days or even hours. At least 1,000 people are said to be sheltering at a steel plant, which is the last Ukrainian stronghold in the southeastern port city. President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's ready to swap Russian prisoners to secure their safe passage. Meanwhile, Russia has test-launched a new addition to its nuclear arsenal. The Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile is said to be capable of overcoming anti-missile defence systems. President Putin says it will give those who threaten Russia something to think about. The Pentagon says it was notified ahead of the launch, and the routine test isn't considered a threat to the US. Prince Harry has revealed he may not return to the UK for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Speaking to NBC News' Today programme, the Duke of Sussex said security issues may keep him away. Harry and his wife Meghan met the Queen on their way to the Invictus Games last week. He told the show he wants to make sure the monarch is protected.
It's just so nice to see her. You know, she's on great form. She's always got a great sense of humour with me, and I'm just making sure that she's, you know, protected and got the right people around.
Well,
her.
you make her laugh. That's what she always says. Did you do it again?
Yes, yeah, I did. Both Megan and I had tea with her, so it was really nice to catch up with her. And you know, home for me now is you know, for the time being, it's in the States.
A movie production company has been fined more than £100,000 for the fatal shooting of a cinematographer. Helena Hutchins was killed when actor Alec Baldwin discharged a prop gun on the set of Rust in October last year. An investigation found the company knew firearm safety procedures weren't being followed and that her death could have been avoided. Johnny Depp has told a court he was the victim of domestic violence during his marriage to Amber Heard. The Hollywood actor is giving evidence in a defamation case he brought against his former wife. Her lawyers say he physically abused her. They've launched a counterclaim against him. Johnny Depp told the court his ex-wife slapped and shoved him during arguments.
Did I myself reach the point of striking Miss Heard in any way, nor have I ever struck any woman.
The Kremlin has described Wimbledon's decision to ban Russian and Belarusian tennis players as unacceptable. It means the world number 2, Daniil Medvedev, and Aryna Sabalenka, who's ranked number 4, won't be allowed to compete in this year's tournament. Organisers say the decision has been made with deep regret. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
Thank you, Miranda. You know what we try to do on this show? Because there's the great churn of the hamster wheel of the news, and you can kind of get obsessed by it. And it helps to be able to step off the hamster wheel and try and look at the stuff that's going to be important in 6 weeks' time, 6 months' time, 6 years' time, 6 decades' time, actually, when we work up to the end of the show. And we talk about this book, Tomorrow's People by Paul Morland. It's actually fairly shocking stuff. And I know some of you will find this hard to credit, but it makes Cakegate seem like just pitiful crumbs from the real cake that's out there. It's also true about the Chicoms, who in this Jubilee year of Her Majesty are actually slicing the Commonwealth up themselves and taking it over island by island. So all the topics we like to do are the big picture topics. But let's start with this Cakegate business, if you insist on it. Cakegate is stale now, and they're slicing it ever thinner. But it was still part of the god-awful, third-rate, ever more limited panto that is PMQs in the House of Commons. Keir Starmer played Punch, and Boris Johnson Judy. And Sir Keir's Punch appears to be a non-binary schoolgirl who made the mistake of transitioning on the NHS. He's accused Johnson of coming up with this Rwanda wheeze as a distraction from Cakegate, rather than as, say, an attempt to address the concerns of actual voters who happen to think the minimum requirement of a supposed sovereign state is that it has a border. I know no one in the public prince who despises Boris more than the Mail on Sunday's Peter Hitchens. Mr. Hitchens insists on calling him Al or Alexander, which is the Prime Minister's real name and what his family calls him. Boris is merely a stage name for a stage persona, like Elton or Bono. Nevertheless, notwithstanding his contempt for Al Johnson, sorry, I didn't mean to lapse into mammy songs this early in the show. Al Johnson, notwithstanding his contempt for Al Johnson, Peter Hitchens wrote an absolutely blistering column on Cakegate the other day in the Mail on Sunday. If I thought he would be replaced by anyone better, I'd be perfectly happy for Johnson to quit. As it is, I barely care. Our current parliament is a care home for non-entities, unmatched in our long history for mediocrity, ignorance and dimness. Who would be better? If we're having resignations, let them all go. All the panic-stricken conformists and groupthink victims who rushed this country into economic and social disaster in March 2020 and who invented the daft regulations under which the Premier has been fined. Let them all go. Peter Hitchens is going to be joining me later in the show. But in this Platinum Jubilee year of our longest reigning monarch, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. Jamaica has already threatened to bolt. Nobody's doing that in the Solomon Islands, but on the other hand, they've just signed a security pact with China. As Chairman Xi's spokesperson puts it, the purpose of China-Solomon security cooperation is to promote social stability and long-term peace and security in the Solomon Islands. Oh, gosh, that's awfully generous of them, but what does it actually mean? Well, it means the deployment of Chinese troops to one of Her Majesty's South Pacific realms. Headline from The Australian: China to fast-track troops push after Honiara deal. Oh, well, on Jubilee Day, maybe all those nice young lads from the People's Liberation Army will fire off a 21-gun salute to Her Majesty, and we can all pretend we're not going down the toilet of history while gorging on toilet-sodden cake. Maybe in between cake debates, the House of Commons could find time to discuss something that actually matters. Instead, I'm joined by someone who always discusses things that actually matter and who saw where the Solomon Islands business was headed far earlier than most. From The Spectator Down Under, the one and only Alexandra Marshall. Alexandra, you know, I like to beat up on the useless government in London as much as anyone else. But on this particular thing, I'm inclined to think that Sydney deserves more of the blame.
Well, to be honest, there's not much.
Canberra.
Well, to be honest, there's not much that we could have done about it. Once China decides that it's going to move into an area, it pretty much does it. Unfortunately for us, we've not just got problems in the Solomon Islands, we've got problems with our own ports. So we've got the port of Darwin under 99-year lease to the Chinese as well. So the Solomon Islands will definitely be in a position to have a Chinese fleet there. They're going to bring in Chinese troops pretty much straight away to, they call it securing the region, but what they actually mean is quashing the domestic rebellions against the corrupt Chinese-led government in the Solomons, where they gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to various MPs in order to bring in Chinese businessmen and deny the fishing rights and farming rights of, you know, ordinary Solomon Island people. So it's more about securing their power. That's why they've done it. And Australia probably could not have stopped it happening. But, you know, at the same time, we're not doing a great deal to secure the rest of the region. So you're right, it's partly our fault.
Well, they used to say that the Indian Ocean was a British lake and the Pacific Ocean was an American lake. China increasingly treats both of them as, it's got two Chinese lakes. Even the British were only content with one lake, and the Americans, but China treats them both as Chinese lakes. Do you think it's actually a rational decision that when the governments of these, you know, very small states look at the world and they see Joe Biden giving a press conference and they see Boris Johnson talking about cake every day in the House of Commons, and they look at Scott Morrison, that they make a rational calculation that China is the future and there's no point being sentimental about Morrison and Johnson and Joe Biden?
Cited calculation about the region that involves personal gain for themselves and short-term gain for their region. But in the long term, China doesn't play nice. It doesn't share resources, and it's not happy to allow individual powers to rise up and have their own autonomy. What China does is turn, like all communist nations, it turns all the surrounding neighbouring states into satellites of itself, which it then uses. It takes all of their resources and it basically runs their governments as if they were part of Beijing. Now, that is not good for the future prosperity of any nation. It doesn't make them safe, it doesn't make them stable, and it basically robs the people of democracy in the long term. But the problem is it's the West's fault this happened, because they look at these islands, they look at Australia and America, and they see a declining West, and they think, oh, well, there's no security there for us against China. So if we want to solve the problem of Pacific Islands clinging to a communist nation, then we have to join together and make ourselves look like a better prospect, renew what it means to have freedom and free trade and genuine cooperation in the region rather than subservience, which is what they're going to get under a China-led Pacific.
Now, a few weeks ago, there was at least one chap in the Australian press calling for Australia to dispatch forces to the Solomon Islands. I take it that's not going to happen now.
Well, we've already got forces in the Solomon Islands. We sent them there in November at the end of last year in order to help, basically support Beijing's interests in the Solomon Islands. Those will stay there. We've got PNGs there as well, and New Zealand. So we're not actually going to withdraw those troops, but we won't be sending any more. And I think as soon as the first Chinese batch of troops arrive, we'll probably find ourselves kicked out.
Yeah, it's a grim thing. What do you make of this AUKUS deal, which sort of came out of the blue, a new pact between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States, AUKUS, at the big Zoom call to announce it? Joe Biden couldn't remember the name of your Prime Minister. He referred to him as that fella down under. which
that was Morrison's fault. I mean, Morrison's got a lot of problems, but that one, I think we can blame that on Biden. No, AUKUS was basically a necessity for Australia and for the UK and for America, because we have squandered our years of peace down here. We've not built anything. We don't have any weapons. We wasted 90 billion odd on submarines, the French building them, as if we could trust the French to build anything useful. So that was our bad. And so America has gone, we need to arm and defend Australia because we represent the most important strategic asset in the Pacific as far as Western interests are concerned. And by Western interests, I mean people like Japan as well, who also rely on free trade through all those maritime trade routes. So AUKUS was basically, we were told what to do. But basically America said, you've got huge problems. You haven't done your job. We are going to help you fix this problem ASAP, because obviously we couldn't do it on our own. And that's because we've got a parliament full of MPs who know nothing about geopolitics and did not correctly identify the threat of China decades ago.
Yes, we're in an odd situation. If you're American, at least you can say, well, Joe Biden and the Democrats, and they've been in China's bag for years and all the rest of it. In the UK and Australia, we have supposedly conservative governments who don't seem to do anything terribly conservative, including on national security.
Well, we haven't just got a problem with conservative parties here. We've got the Greens, who are basically communists who want to open the door, cancel all foreign debt that we've got, demilitarize us. They want to decarbonize our military, which I'm not quite sure how that works. They love China. They don't have any problem with China, drowning the coral atolls in concrete and missiles. That's fine. But we're not allowed to have anything to defend ourselves. So you're right, we have a big problem with conservative parties, and that's why I've got minor parties coming up in Australia, because everyone is looking desperately for some common sense and they cannot get it out of major parties.
Well, let me just ask you a follow-up on that business with the Greens, because the Greens have said, as I said, I think this is the Queen, for good or bad, loves the Commonwealth, and she's made it what it is. And she's seeing it systematically dismantled by the Chinese all over the globe. And I think it's worth talking about that. But the Greens say, no. If you start talking about China and the Solomon Islands, it's just because you're a racist. Are you a racist for being interested in the Solomon Islands?
So here's the thing. If we want to talk about collectivists and their relationship with racism, which is a strong and long history, then we'd be here all night. But the Greens don't use racism that way. They use it as a cheap and petty tool to stop you asking questions and to stop you criticising the genuinely terrifying regimes and crimes that are committed. So if you want to question China about, I don't know, COVID, maybe collapsing the global economy and killing, a lot of millions of people, well, then no, you're racist if you do that. If you want to talk about protecting the indigenous people in the Pacific from China, which is what we're actually talking about, it's the indigenous people of the Solomon Islands who are lost out and who are protesting, well, you're racist if you want to protect them. This is what the Greens do when they have a collectivist mindset, and the Greens aren't interested in security. They are the old school international socialists. They have on their website and on their documentation, they want a global order and for us to be governed by an international bureaucracy. So they don't mind if China rocks up.
Yeah. No, and right now the betting is if there is a global order, it's more likely when people say, oh, we want a global order, they think it's going to look like Sweden or Denmark. Actually, the betting now is that it will look like China. And if the entire Australian Green Party were to be dropped in the churning Yangtze, which is a colour of river I have never seen anywhere else on the planet, I would be interested to see how long all those Greens actually survive in that putrid Yangtze run by the regime they admire so much. Thank you very much, Alexandra. It's always great to see you, and you can check out Alexandra's she runs the Australian end of The Spectator and does a cracking job, so do check out that website, spectator.com.au. Coming up, we've got your thoughts and comments. You can let me know, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. We have Paul Morland and a fantastic book called Tomorrow's People coming up, and I think we might even have Peter Hitchens. He's running a bit late, but he might be back by now. Anyway, hang on in there. We got lots more to come. See you in a minute.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hey, welcome back. We're going to go now to Peter Hitchens, a little delayed, but he is on the telephone with us. And Peter, I was reading from your excellent column, and I said no one despises the Prime Minister more than you, but this gateau-gate business is completely pointless because the logic of your column is basically that if people are as angry as they claim to be about what Johnson did, they would also be demanding that the entire 2 years be reversed and never be allowed to happen again. But they don't seem to be connecting the dots on that, really.
Yes, I am. Not currently, no.
Hello, Peter. Is Peter there?
Not a thing, no. Ever since.
Oh, he can't hear us, apparently. I thought if we put it on the telephone, there might be a chance of it actually working and make it easier for MI5 to wiretap him. But that's not going to happen. Have we got the viewer reaction? No, we don't. Okay, I'm just going to sing selections from Phantom of the Opera again. Sail, share with me one love, one lifetime. We can do the whole CD by the time this gets through. Okay, what do we got here? Margaret says, your Australian guest says China takes over other countries and turns them into satellites of itself, exactly like the British Empire's was. Nothing new under the sun, as they say. Well, I don't know about that, Margaret. I've got to disagree about that. David Starkey said on this show, empires are real. Rubbish like the European Union and these postmodern what Justin Trudeau calls the post-national nation-state are unreal. So if you look at China, it behaves like a conventional empire. If you look at Russia, it behaves like a conventional empire. If you look at Saudi Arabia or Iran, it behaves like a cultural, conventional empire. And if you look at this, look at us, we're just rubbish. We're going on about net zero and we're not going on about anything real. Now, the difference is when you say that Britain takes over countries and turns them into satellites of itself, that's completely untrue. There are always huge. Are you wearing pajamas at the moment? That's an Indian word. Are you sitting in bed wearing pajamas and eating kedgeree? Or if it's all gone downhill, are you sitting in bed wearing pajamas, eating kedgeree, and wondering if the noise on the veranda is that of a thug about to break into your house? Those are all words that come from India. Thug, pajamas, kedgeree, veranda, bungalow. So it was a two-way deal. Why do you think India today isn't like, say, the Middle East, a bunch of crazy quilt of one-man psycho states and decrepit theologies dependent on oil? Because of Lord Macaulay's Indian Education Bill. That's why if you've got a problem with your laptop and you call up customer service, it's answered by Rajiv in Bangalore. There will be no such benefits from Chinese rule in the Pacific. None whatsoever. None at all. China is building an empire on debt. What China's doing is actually saying to people, we'll improve your roads, we'll build ports, we'll build airports, and you take out long-term debt, and if you can't afford the repayments, then we'll take over those facilities. We'll own your national airport, as they do in Uganda. We'll own your national port, as they do in Sri Lanka, and eventually, a year or two down the line, we will own your roads in Jamaica. Adrian says, if China puts troops on the Solomon Islands, we should regard that as an act of war, an invasion like the Falklands. Well, I wish we could, but unfortunately, the Falklands were not a sovereign entity. They were a colony. That's a good word. They were a colony. And the Solomon Islands became independent 40 years ago, and their government is the government of a sovereign state, and they're the ones who've turned to China. And you know, this is this is actually a lot of ignorant people talk about the fall of the British Empire. And could you stop talking, by the way, in the air? Just if you could knock that off, please. It's bad enough that you weren't able to arrange the guest, but I don't really want talking in the air. I'll tell you what, let's take a break and see if there's any guests at the end of it.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
He's the architect of Britain's COVID-19 lockdowns.
These measures are not advice. They are rules and will be enforced.
He's the man who's been battling to save our civil liberties from the very start.
There's absolutely no excuse not to return to normal life immediately.
Now Matt Hancock and Dan Wootton are going head-to-head over the most controversial measures of the pandemic. What regrets, if any, does the former Health Secretary have about his COVID battle plan? Were the lives and livelihoods destroyed by lockdown worth the sacrifice? And has he opened the door to further assaults on our civil liberties?
Everybody now has it in their power to save lives and protect the NHS. Home is now the front line.
It's Matt Hancock's turn to give evidence in the lockdown inquiry.
The true cost of lockdown is about to hit the world hard.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on GB News.
Do you dig demography? I do. It's a bit of a hobby of mine because I don't play golf or go dog sledding. I know very well when I got interested in it. I happened to be in Vienna just after 9/11, and there was a maternity shop, a mother care type joint. And the people going in and out seemed to me not quite representative of the more general population around me in the streets. So I opened the door and took a ganders, and it changed the way I look at the world. Because if you go into a maternity shop or a kindergarten, that's a good clue as to the world you're going to be living in 20 years' time. By the way, speaking of demography, Mothercare in the UK is out of business, which may be all you need to know about UK demography. But as I said, I'm just an amateur. If they had a talent show with Simon Cowell for amateur demographers, demographic idol, the demography factor, Britain's got demographers, I'd give it a go. But until that day, I'm going to leave it to the professionals like Paul Morland, who has written one of the most important books you will read this year, Tomorrow's People, The Future of Humanity in 10 Numbers. And they're 10 very arresting numbers. Paul Morland joins me now. Paul, great to see you and congratulations on this book. I take it it's because it's because as a professional demographer, you understand that people have a hard time wrapping their heads around it. So you chose these 10 numbers as a way to just so that even the biggest simpleton can get what's going on.
Well, they're a way into the story. I wrote a book a long time ago, actually. It was based on my PhD thesis, and a friend read a draft and he said, too many numbers, not enough story. So I think you need to combine the numbers with the story. If you can make those numbers really arresting, if you can get those into people's minds and get them to think about them, then you can draw the story out from the numbers and you can make people understand, you can bring to people's attention how those numbers are representative of much bigger trends in the world.
Yeah, well, I want to come back to one of those little vignettes you present in the book, because it made me have a think about certain things in a different light. But the biggest number you have here is 4 billion, which is projected to be the population of Africa at the end of this century. And that's basically going to be half the planet. Half the planet will be African. And that's a huge change, because if you go back just 100 years, the population of the British Isles and the population of British West Africa were more or less exactly the same. England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales versus what's now Nigeria, the Gambia, Ghana, Sierra Leone and so forth. People don't quite grasp the difference in scale in what's happened in Africa.
I think there's another way of putting it which might resonate with people, which is if you go back to 1950, there were 2 Europeans for every sub-Saharan African. And by the end of this century, there are going to be 6 or 7 sub-Saharan Africans for every European. And I think that is going to change the world. Now, I can't tell you exactly how it will change it. I always say that demography is one lens on the future, but it's only one lens. But for sure, when there are 6 or 7 times as many Africans as Europeans, versus when, going back to 1950, there were twice the number of Europeans to Africans, it will change everything. It's going to change the demography is the sort of fundamental thing. It's going to change economics. It's going to change global strategy, military power. It's going to change culture. It's going to change food. It will be a very different world when the weightings of the 2 continents are so very different.
Yeah, it's going to change something. You can have a debate over what that change will be, but the idea that there will be nothing changed, I think is ridiculous. Now, you then have another number of yours, which is from California regarding ethnic change, and that number is 22, which is the percentage of Californian school children who are white. So very quickly, the United States is going to become what they call a majority-minority country, as it were. And again, this has all happened really in the space of just 30 or 40, since the Rwandan genocide, more or less.
Yes, and I feel I'm sort of skating a little bit on ice when I talk about these things, and I try to be dispassionate and fairly neutral about them, because I think before you can have a debate, a meaningful, grown-up, sensible debate about these things, and if you don't debate them, I think you're leaving them to the fringes and to the nutters. But before you can have a sensible, grown-up debate on issues like immigration, on issues like ethnicity and ethnic change, I think it's very helpful to have some facts and some numbers to hand. Now, some people may think that's a wonderful thing. California has become more diverse, and others may regret it. I think it is a reasonable issue to discuss, but I only think it's reasonable for reasonable people to discuss it when they know the facts.
Right, which is very important. You also make what I thought was a very interesting point, is that people can over time become something other. Nigel Farage always likes to point out that his family came here as Huguenot refugees, and there doesn't seem anything terribly Huguenot about Nigel these days. He's become more English than most of the English that his family settled among. And you make the point, which really actually tickled me in a strange way, because you pointed out that at the height of the so-called Irish troubles, when the IRA were targeting all the most powerful men in the country, the guys they were actually targeting, the two most powerful, were Jim Callaghan and Dennis Healy. And those are both Irish names, but at some point they managed to become English, I think in the case of Healy, and Welsh in the case of Callaghan. So
well, Callaghan sat for a Welsh constituency, but he sat for a Welsh constituency, but he was actually English. Minor point.
Yeah, so the Irish became English in this case, and that you can see that the Irish became French Quebecois in eastern Quebec in Canada. You can see that. I wonder though, do you think that's something that can be done at an unlimited level, or is it just occasionally, as with Jim Callaghan and Dennis Healy?
Well, it did work the other way as well. I mean, you had Republican leaders in Northern Ireland with names like Hume and Adams. So it was a two-way street. It certainly can occur at a certain level. I mean, I would hold myself up as an example of that, if I may. As far as I know, I don't have a single ancestor born in the UK. Both my parents came from Germany. I now consider myself a quarter Ukrainian, since one of my grandfathers was born in what was then an obscure corner of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I feel completely British. So, of course, it can happen. I think what happens, however, is that it is a matter of time, and it is a matter of critical mass. So I think when you get very, very large movements of people in a very, very short space of time, there is little incentive for them to integrate into the wider society, because they can create little worlds of their own. Over time, I think integration will happen if one limits immigration, or if immigration is fairly limited, but very, very large numbers of people moving very, very fast across continents. And I think the chance of that kind of integration is much lower.
I would agree with you on that. Just there's a big takeaway from the book that I heard just the other day being discussed on an American radio show. Someone must have got an advance copy of it, and they're calling it Morland's Trilemma. And this is where you're inviting people to, I think you use the examples of the UK, Israel, and Japan, where you can say there's a choice. There's three choices. You can pick any two, but you're not going to get the hat trick. Just explain that for us.
So I'll explain it in the context of those countries, if I may. Japan has decided it doesn't want mass immigration. It wants to retain its ethnic homogeneity. And it has got more immigration than it had, but very, very limited. And it has decided it doesn't want to have large families. So they're giving up, they're being what I call egotistical, perhaps, in not having large families and meeting their own personal requirements first. And they wish to retain the E, so these E of egotism and the E of ethnicity. And what's taken a hit has been the Japanese economy. Britain, meanwhile, we've also had the egotism of fairly small family sizes, but we have effectively kept our economy going, and the trade-in has been that we have had mass immigration and very rapid ethnic change. The Israelis, by contrast, have chosen to have large families. It's extraordinary. They have 3 children per woman in an advanced society, more than a child, more than any other country at that kind of level of development. And their economy has boomed. What they've given away is the nappy changing at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to keep a predominantly Jewish state and a booming economy, and not get mass immigration of people who don't meet their ethnic criteria, and at the same time to keep the economy going.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's no way you can get to all three. And so you've got the Japanese, whether that nation survives, whether that people survive, they're quite content to die as Japanese, and they've made that, and they've all but made that choice explicitly. And then you have others, which is like most in Western Europe, North America, who say, well, okay, we've given up having babies, but we can import people to have the babies we couldn't be bothered having ourselves. Now, when you look at that, Paul, is there any guys like Viktor Orban have tried to reverse it? I drove into Hungary from Ukraine the other day, and it's got a big sign there saying, "Welcome to Hungary, family friendly," and that's great. But actually, is it possible to reverse demographic decline?
Well, in the famous words of Deng Xiaoping, it may be too early to say. We haven't had 200 years of trying. What's clear is that governments can be very effective at helping get fertility rates down in countries that are developing. They're pushing at an open door. If they distribute contraception, a little bit of propaganda, a little bit of encouragement, and you can see staggering falls in fertility. Or they can go the coercive route, which I don't think is necessary, which is the Chinese route. Hungary and Russia actually stand out as examples of countries that have very, very low fertility and are throwing a lot of money at trying to revive the birth rate. And for technical reasons, it would seem that although the birth rate's gone up a little in both countries, it's probably not because of these policies, and these policies are only going to make a marginal difference. And what you can say for sure is even if these policies are making a positive difference, they're no way going to get you anything close to the 2+ that you need for the population in the long term to be stable. So what I argue very strongly is that what this is about ultimately is not about government support, although there's certainly things governments can do. It's about culture, it's about attitudes, it's about people's choices and how those choices collectively are national and amount to national and ethnic choices.
So when you see somewhere like Ireland, which north and south of the border has a fertility rate of about 1.7, which is sort of incredible for the way people thought about Irish, particularly Irish Catholics, just a couple of decades ago. They're not having enough children to replace themselves. In Scotland, it's even worse, which is 1.3. So you're actually declining quite dramatically. And your view is that you can nibble at it at the margins, but you're not really ever going to get it up to 2.1 or higher again.
One thing that really matters is when that fertility rate went down. So in the case of Ireland, it was still pretty healthy 20 years ago. And in Britain, we've had 50 years of sub-replacement fertility, and only in the 2020s are we going to have more deaths than births. So it takes a long time to work through. And Ireland, although it is sub-replacement in Ireland, it's recent enough that the population still has natural growth. And they've got a few decades of natural growth, and people don't worry about it until it's kind of too late. It would have been great if Britain had been worrying about it in the 1970s, but at that point there were still plenty of youngsters coming into the workforce from previous baby booms.
Yeah.
And by the time it hits, you then have a relatively small number of young people. So even if you get the fertility rate up, and each of them is having enough children in long term to replace themselves, in the short term, there just aren't enough young people having children compared to the oldsters dying. So I think there's a lag. The problem is there's a lag, and by the time governments get to it, it's often somewhat too late, and what governments do is ineffective. Yeah. I think it's a change of culture, approach, attitude, and what people aspire to. And ultimately, I'm not preaching. Ultimately, I'm trying simply to point out that if people have certain preferences and certain cultural attitudes, there are certain consequences.
No, well, that's why the Morland's trilemma thing is interesting, because it boils it down, says these are the choices. Japan made one, Israel made another, the United Kingdom's made the third. And it's very easy to understand like that. But because I don't want to sound like just a big gloom and doomer, there are advantages to an aging society. And it means, you know, your chances of doing well at the Grammy Awards or the Oscars or other, you know, young pop culture things are diminished. But a theme of your book that sort of percolates through it in various aspects is that an old society is not prone to war and revolution, because we're basically all sitting at home watching Coronation Street with our mug of cocoa or whatever. And I was thinking about it because the thought occurred to me first, I think about 20 years ago. Marine Le Pen is running in the French presidential election this weekend, and when her dad got into the final round in 2002, and he looked pretty, he's still around, but he looked pretty decrepit even then. And I was saying, my European friends keep telling me that the strong man on the horse is going to come along. Well, here's the big right-wing strong man, and he's too old to get up on the horse and go forth into battle. And it's a very, we talked last time about how it's so weird, these two aging societies, Russia and Ukraine, going to war when they've got no young men to throw into the fight. It just, and I wonder if that, as I said, it probably underlines the risk calculation in Afghanistan. It's certainly got to underline the risk calculation for China, where they've got, tens of millions of surplus young men there are no young ladies for. That changes the character of a society.
I think it does, and in the case of Russia, and certainly the case of China, even when they go into population decline, they are going to have huge numbers of young men. So creating an army to invade a neighbour is not a problem. They're going to have plenty of people to do it. The issue, I think, is that as the society ages and families get smaller, there's enormous pressure, social pressure, against sending that one son off to battle. And we see heartbreaking stories, both from Ukraine and from Russia, of a mother with one child in whom she's invested all her hopes. At 24, 25, he dies on the battlefield. So certainly in a democratic society, there's huge pressure against that sort of thing. And it's interesting that the casualty figures are being kept from the Russian people. And the mourning mothers are mourning privately, effectively. At some point, that may well tip, and you may get a change of sentiment in Russia when they start to realise that in a few weeks of war in Ukraine, they've lost more men than they did in Afghanistan, and they've got fewer and fewer men to lose.
Now, when you made that point that the Irish entered the demographic death spiral, as it were, a little later than the English did. The Scots thing I actually find particularly interesting, because I just can't understand the point of an independence movement when you've got insufficient young people to staff the new nation. That doesn't make any sense to me. But when you say it depends, there's a huge difference between whether you enter the death spiral in 1998 or in 1972. Isn't demographics a question of last man standing? So that, for example, when you talk to I think it's the young lady from Niger in the book, that actually she's got a huge advantage because they're going to be the last people to go in for sub-replacement fertility.
Well, there's something I called, I think in my last book, The Human Tide, last mover advantage. We hear of first mover advantage. I mean, certainly Britain had first mover advantage. It had a population explosion and it did colonise huge chunks of the world and shape huge chunks of the world as a result. But I think your point on Africa is true, that whenever the Africans choose to significantly lower their fertility rate, they will still have an enormous population growth ahead of them, and they will be the last man standing. So that's really significant. But I also think the other thing about Africa is that there's a general rule that the later you go through this demographic transition, the more dramatic it is. So what's happened in Africa is we've had a fantastic drop in mortality rates. It's not like people used to have 2 or 3 kids and now they're having 7 or 8. People used to die like flies. And a little bit of intervention, a bit of healthcare, a bit of education makes an enormous difference. Infant mortality rates drop far, far quicker in Africa than they did in the UK. When you're at the cutting edge of that drop of mortality, it's pretty slow. In Africa, it fell like a cliff. So if fertility takes a while to come down, you get much stronger population growth than you did, say, in Britain in the 19th century, when mortality did drop by historic standards then very sharply, but it took a long time to come down. And therefore, fertility started to come down equally, and the excess of fertility over mortality, which is the population growth, wasn't such a big deal. In Africa, it's been that dramatic drop in mortality rates, that very late adoption of what we call the demographic transition. While fertility rates have held up quite a long time, that has been fueling this and will continue to fuel this enormous population growth in Africa, which is quite globally unprecedented.
You make the point that there's high levels of female illiteracy in certain parts of Africa, so they don't have a lot of choice about, you know, getting out of the house and going off and starting a software company in the capital city. It's not open to them. But it's more interesting in some ways to look at it from the other way around, where something that we used to take for granted, such as the maternal instinct, can actually be wiped out in a significant part of the population. I think something like 42% of German university, female university graduates in Germany don't have any children. That would seem at odds with how we used to think of women and the maternal instinct.
Well, I wonder if there always was more of a spectrum in terms of the maternal instinct. But as you say, when you don't have an education, you don't have choices. When women do get choices, some continue to want to have large families and others will choose not to. And that results in a lower fertility rate. I think there's some fascinating work been done, and I don't know how reliable it is, that suggests maybe pronatalism, both in men and women, loving children and wanting to have children, is genetic. Now, in the past, that gene didn't matter because nobody could really control their fertility. But in a world where people can control their fertility, all the people who don't want to have kids will effectively die out. And we could have, perhaps the only hope for a revival in fertility rates in developed countries is that the people who are having children have that pronatal gene which gets passed down. I'm not a geneticist. I don't know if that's true, but it's a very interesting thought.
No, that's actually a fascinating point, because when I said something like that Scottish statistic, that it's 1.3 children per woman, that doesn't mean that every Scottish woman is having 1.3 children. It means that some women are having 4 and 5 kids and others are having none at all. So
I think we can
if
say
you're right about
no
the
Scottish
genetics,
women are having 1.3 children, actually.
No, that's safe. I won't even get into some of these. I just heard tootling along the road the other day on the radio that all redheads will be extinct by the next century. So there's all kinds of consequences to this, big and small. But it is a terrific book, and I think we're going to get you back to talk about it a bit more, because this is actually the biggest issue of our time. Thank you very much, Paul. The book is called Tomorrow's People. Thank you. The Future of Humanity in 10 Numbers. Let's do a bit of stumping before we go. Jim says, isn't it just wonderful that there's clearly no crime in London, so the Met can spend so much time, manpower and taxpayer money on Partygate. Yeah, we have to devote huge resources to every separate cake incident. They will stop at nothing to track down all the cakes wherever they are. Ruth says, I want to read Dr. Morland's book, but I'm too frightened to. Don't be frightened, Ruth. It's a very calm book. I would have written it far more hysterically. Run for the hills, the sky is falling, but it's a calm book that you should read. That's going to do it for us. Dan Wootton's going to wallop your Wednesday as no one can. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello, I'm Luke Meyer with your weather forecast. And for the next few days, we've got a lot of dry weather around across the UK. There will be some sunshine from time to time, but we will start to see the risk of some showers across the south. With high pressure over Scandinavia, that's keeping our weather fairly settled across the UK at the moment, keeping these weather fronts out towards the west at bay. They're not the ones to worry about, but we may see some showers developing from the south as we go in towards the weekend. But for the rest of Wednesday night and into Thursday, a lot of clear skies across the country, so a chilly night to come. Could be a touch of frost, particularly for sheltered parts of Scotland. And across eastern Scotland, we will also see some low cloud and haar drifting in from the North Sea. Temperatures 2 to 5 as we start the day on Thursday. But for many of us, it's a bright and sunny start. Any early morning mist or fog should clear away fairly quickly. And then a lot of sunshine across the UK through Thursday. Away from that is that North Sea coast, particularly northeast England, southeast Scotland, where we could see some low cloud. Now, there will be a bit more cloud across the southwest and across Wales through the afternoon, but in any sunshine, still likely to see temperatures 18 degrees Celsius, but as I say, cooler on that east coast as we begin to see a bit more of an easterly breeze feeding in. Now, that's going to become more of a feature of our weather over the next few days. Through Thursday night, it will drag in a lot more low cloud across eastern parts of England and Scotland, so